Warm greetings from Jamaica, from the English Caribbean. My name is Jenna Blackwood. I'm a member of the ASLA and a practicing landscape architect.
Hi, my name is Patricia Green, also from Jamaica, and I am an architect and also a member of the e-commerce SCCL IFLA committee.
Hello, my name is Mary Ann Twyman, and I am a landscape architect also from St. Anne's Bay in Jamaica.
Hi, my name is Suzanne Spence. I'm a landscape architect coming to you from Montego Bay, Jamaica.
Hi, I'm Kevin Talma, a landscape architect from Barbados, member of ASLA and US Green Building Council.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Ryan Adams. I'm also a landscape architect from Barbados.
This afternoon, we want to share an insight into the English Caribbean, some of the landscapes and some of the issues that we are experiencing. Many people might be familiar with the Caribbean, a group of islands between North and South America, home to approximately 44 million people. We are small island developing states. We are vulnerable to many hazards, to hurricanes, volcanoes, and earthquakes. And even now, we are thinking about the impact of climate change, especially with sea level rise and extreme weather events. Some of the things that we have to deal with, the issues of concern, include social justice and environmental equity, stormwater management, and as I said, impacts of climate change. Here you can see the geographic location of these islands that we're representing. Jamaica in the northeastern section, Barbados in the east, and Trinidad to the south. And just a little bit on my island in particular. Jamaica is the third largest island in the Caribbean, and it's actually the largest English-speaking island. Here we can see some of the symbols of Jamaica, our national flag, our coat of arms, our national bird, an endemic species, the hummingbird, our national tree, the blue maho, our national flower, the lignum vitae, and the national butterfly, the giant swallowtail butterfly, which is actually the second largest butterfly species in the Western Hemisphere. We have a population of almost 3 million. Our capital is Kingston on the southeastern coast. Our tourism capital is Montego Bay in the north. And our highest point is our Blue Mountain Peak, where we also have a UNESCO World Heritage Site, which was designated that because of the biodiversity and the cultural heritage there. Some of the landscapes that we can boast of, I just mentioned our World Heritage Site, the Blue and John Crow Mountains. Here we find many endemic species, including the giant swallowtail butterfly that I mentioned, and the hummingbird, and the national tree, and many other species. Here we also find our maroon culture, descendants of runaway slaves and any indigenous settlers that we had. Here we have an image of a wild landscape or salt ponds on the southeastern coast, southeastern coast. This is a very unique ecosystem. It's a lagoon which has many specialized species. They're brine shrimp, and at one point in our history, we actually had salt production at this pond. One of our vernacular landscapes at one of the traditional houses in the rural area of Jamaica. One of the most iconic attractions are Dunn's River Falls. Here you have a series of terraced pools where visitors can climb and relax. There's also a hydropower plant on the upper part of the falls. And so it's used for multiple purposes. Trinidad is the island in the most southernmost island. And here we have symbols of Trinidad, their flag, their coat of arms, their national flower, the steel pan, which is actually the only instrument that is said to have been discovered or invented in the 20th century. And here we have a flock of the scarlet ibis, their national bird in the Coroni swamp. They have a population of about 1.4 million. Their capital is Port of Spain, circled in red. Their highest point is about 3,000 feet or almost 1,000 meters in height. And some of the landscapes, you have here the Pitch Lake, the largest natural deposit of asphalt in the world. You have one of their historic houses which surrounds their savanna, the Queen's Park Savannah in Port of Spain, their capital. And in the region, here you will find the second largest carnival to Rio in Brazil. And this also happens around the Queen Park Savannah.
So I'll tell you a little bit about Barbados. We're the most eastern Caribbean in the south side of the Caribbean. Smaller island than Trinidad and Jamaica, 167 square miles, population approximately 287,000 people. The capital of Bridgetown, which is also a UNESCO World Heritage Site from 2011. And our highest point is 1,115 feet, which is quite low. And an interesting comment as we move forward to see some pictures of typical landscapes is because it's so flat, it was heavily cultivated, 99% completely in a monoculture of sugarcane. And as we're going into the decline of sugar, right now, even though it's at its densest in terms of development, it is probably the most wooded that it has been in 300 years. You can see the flag, our coat of arms, the national flower, Pride of Barbados, and the pelican, which we only find one or two of them around these days, but it is our national bird. Have an assortment of images to show. The first one is from historic Bridgetown and its garrison. And this picture is of the Barbados Public Library, part of the UNESCO World Heritage Site. And interestingly enough, the photograph also catches a pocket park that was developed hundreds of years ago. And the cenotaph to the left of the photo is actually the attempt to provide potable water for residents of Bridgetown. On the east side, we have our rolling landscapes, wild landscapes, coastal landscapes, not much development, probably predicated from the fact that the land is actually slipping into the sea. So large development here on this island, on this side of the island, could be technically prohibitive, but right now it is our oasis on our small island to get away from the crowds. And in contrast, we have the south and west coast, which are densely developed. And again, interestingly enough, this is where landscape architecture has had some impact, where this photograph shows a coastal protection project. And what came out of it was a very popular and heavily used coastal boardwalk and coastal landscape. And this photograph is kind of what's our wild land, what we would call our wild landscape in Barbados. And it's a series of gullies and caves throughout the country that function as drainage canals from the countryside to the sea, and also for recharge into the aquifer, our coral stone aquifers, and is probably the most concentrated places of biodiversity that you'll find on the island. St. Nicholas Abbey. This expresses a landscape of industry and agriculture, where a historic home was refurbished for tourism reasons, historic home and traditional railway. But in addition to that, the property still maintains production of sugar for a boutique rum production. And finally, the photo of a residential landscape. And this photograph shows our traditional chattel village side by side with, you know, kind of emergent typologies of houses, where it goes from timber to wall to complete wall. And you'll find this both in town and country. Newton's Slave Ground is a landscape of memory, where a slave burial ground has been kind of not developed, but at least highlighted so people could visit. So descendants of slaves could actually visit this space to commune with their descendants. And
now we'll pass over to Pat as she will carry us through the Spanish history in our region.
It's a wonderful thing to know that even as English Caribbean nations, we are tied culturally to the Spanish, not only Spanish South America, but also Central America, and especially Central America, because when Christopher Columbus came, he came to the Caribbean. And when he did, on his fourth voyage, he actually touched on the Central American nations. And here is a huge opportunity for us to get together as APAC, and we can possibly do a Columbus route as part of the cultural landscape of our combined nations, whether we are English Caribbean or whatever. And when we go forward, we see that Jamaica has a site, Seville, and it was very important because it's the first site of mutiny in the Americas. And the Porras brothers actually came against Columbus, and they tried to overthrow him and take away the ships because he was actually shipwrecked on Jamaica for 1 year at that wonderful site in Seville, the first site in the Americas ever to be called Seville. So it's a wonderful site of cultural contact. And here is an image which shows a recreation of what that site may have been. And notice, it's very important for the cultural landscape of our America's region that the early Spanish settlements were on the coast. It is much later, as a result of things that happened within our context, especially the islands, that the laws of the Indies came out later on, where they actually stipulated that cities should be built further inland. As we move forward, we will also see a site. It's an archaeological site, and it is again at Seville, where they had, this is the works yard for the Masons, where they had built the church in 1525, and you can see the cultural contacts between Tainos and also the Spaniards. And then the English came to Jamaica in 1655, and you can see from the illustrations that after 161 years, the nation of Jamaica, island of Jamaica, was really built up with a cultural landscape of the Spanish on which the English superimposed there, as we see also in Trinidad, which was an island for under Spanish rule for at least almost 300 years, until 1797, when the English actually took the nation from Spain. So as we move forward, we can see here this slide, which shows that in 1593, Sir Walter Raleigh, who was English, actually went to Trinidad, and he tried to take Trinidad from the Spanish and was unsuccessful, but he boasted about this as we move forward. Thank you, Jenna.
Thank you, Pat. And after having that introduction, we're now going to share with you from each island some of the insights, some of the issues that we have to deal with, issues that are of interest to us and that we thought would be interesting for you to have a view of.
Hi, everyone. Starting off in Jamaica with two of our oldest green spaces. First, you have here on the screen Royal Botanical Gardens at Hope. It's one of 4 premier botanic gardens. It sits on 200 acres. Basically, it's an old sugar plantation lands, and it has one of the few remaining large green spaces that we have with remaining relics of brick and limestone. It's sandwiched between it at the foot of the Blue Mountains and bordered by the university community as well as Hope residential community. And today, its features over the years include a lake etched in the form of Jamaica, the sunken gardens, the lily pond, a maze, Palm Avenue, and the newly built Chinese gardens, and also a labyrinth. In its glory days, it boasts a place for showcasing orchids. It had the Orchid House and many listings of rare and endemic botanic species from around the world. It still remains a place of choice for garden events, weddings, film backdrops with its enviable and picturesque views and scenery. And it remains one of the largest spaces for passive recreation for the Kingston area. Over the years, we've had interventions towards reservations and upgrades and some repurposing of spaces with the landscape architects and students involved in that effort. The operations switched from government owned and operations in the 1990s, and now it is under the care of Nature Preservation Foundation, which depends on private sector funding, grants, and the push really is to make these spaces sustainable, self-sustainable. Next slide, Jenna. Another one we have here is Devon House. Let me see. Devon House has an interesting history. This started in the 1700s. It was bequeathed to the church, and a rectory was established there. In 1881, the rectory was purchased by George Sibel, and he's famous for being the first Black millionaire who earned his riches from gold mining in South America. It exchanged the hands a few times in the 20th century, and it was earmarked for demolition in 1965 when the then Minister of Welfare, who became Prime Minister of Jamaica later on, the Honorable Edward Seaga, put a preservation order on the property. In 1974, the building was renovated and became the National Gallery. And later on, when government changed again, there was a refurbish of the property in the 80s, and then it became as Devon House's public space and attraction for its iconic pastries, patties, and ice cream shops. It sits on about 20 acres of green open space. And in 2011, it was declared the 4th most popular green space in the world by National Geographic for ice cream. Due to its location and accessibility, it's still considered one of the most functional green spaces, providing relief in the heart of the city of Kingston. Thank you, Jenna.
Here we have an image of our National Heroes Park. It was designated as such in the 1950s. Marianne, would you like to continue and share with us?
Yes. It's the largest remaining public green space in the heart of the city. And it's mainly surrounded by low-income residential communities. The land is largely in ruined, apart from about a 5-acre plot, which is the burial ground and memorial park to Jamaica's national heroes, as well as some of the past prime ministers. But the field part of the park is used for sport, like football and cricket by all the surrounding communities. So there's definitely, you can see the need for this public green space. Next. Because of this, 3 female landscape architects united and voluntarily prepared a development proposal for the park. The proposal was then accepted by the government in 2003, and a number of the elements of the plan were eventually constructed before the current government decided to locate the new Jamaican Parliament buildings in the park. And therefore in 2019, they launched an architectural competition. This seemed to many to be a questionable location, and will lead again to the shrinking of our green space inside the center of the city. But unfortunately, many Jamaicans still believe that you need a building to justify developing a park, which is unfortunate. However, more recently, with the changes in our planning density in the city and the resulting overcrowding, congestion, and lack of green space, there are calls now from the general public to develop more parks and recreational green space within the city.
As mentioned by Marianne before, the government decided to proceed with a design competition for a new Parliament building on the Heroes Park site. The competition was open to international teams with a stipulation that they must be led by a Jamaican national. 24 teams submitted proposals. 5 of them were shortlisted to proceed to the detailed design stage. All the designs had different features of sustainability, such as water conservation and energy conservation, stormwater management, all those types of features. They were all different interpretations, really, of how a symbolic building could be located in the space while still providing a fair amount of green space for the use of the public. Even though the competition rules suggested that the building should be located in the center of the site, there were some variations in how different teams approached it. 2 of our local landscape architects participated, were on 2 of the teams, and the teams that they were on both placed in the top 5 of the competition. We also had one of our members here who was a member of the Government Oversight Agency. And at the end of the whole process, when a team was selected, that team that won did not actually have a local landscape architect or a landscape architect on board, but then they recruited one of our local colleagues to assist with developing the landscape designs. Just to go through the designs, on the right was one of the submissions. This one is called the National Flower. The design team for that one decided that they didn't want to place the building in the center of the site, and so they put it off to the west on the edge so that the remaining green space would be able to flow throughout the whole space. One concern for the designers why they made that decision was that traditionally, when Parliament is held in Jamaica, the area is usually secured and the public does not have access to the immediate surroundings. And so they wanted to ensure that even when Parliament was in session, the rest of the park would be able to function. In keeping it on the edge, they were able to keep many of the pathways that existed through the space. And then they added new radiating pathways from the building, which would then link the different monument areas within the site. Included in the design, there were a lot of culturally significant or native species, plant species, and they also included community gardens, which was a new concept which had not been done before. And this was one of the proposals that they had for the space. The form of the building, the shape of the building was actually inspired by the national flower, which is the lignum vitae, and you can see that shape in the form of the roof, the shells of the roof. In the design on the left, that is another top 5 entrant, and another local architect landscape architect was on that team, and that one is called Ubuntu, I am because we are. In this instance, this building was placed more or less in the center of the site, but what they did is they tried to create a ceremonial entrance or ceremonial link between the building, which is in the center, and the shrine area, the existing shrine area of the site, which is to the south of the site. And you can see there this very monumental and ceremonial walkway that is set up. So the rest of the landscaping really focused very closely around the building, and then not much attention really was paid to how that landscaping flowed into the rest of the space, because the focus of this competition was really the building. And this is the winning design called Out of Many, One People. It featured the building in the center of the site. And you can see that in doing this, it has cut the site into 3 distinct zones. So there's a northern zone, a central zone with the building, and a southern zone, which actually is where the monuments and the shrines are located. So this depiction is a little misleading because it shows the entire space as green, but there are elements which are on the site now which will remain. It is also said that it was reported that this was also the people's choice. There was a voting competition, and this was the winner. And that was not that being the winner determined it as the final winner, but that it was coincidental that this turned out to be the winning design, and it was also the people's choice. As you can see, just because of the nature of how this design is set out, the building will be in the center, and then the traditional uses of the space would then maybe not remain, where the communities are able to use it for sports. That still has not been completely resolved. So they're now in the working, teething pains of how they're going to resolve the issues of security, of access, and providing other amenities. It does have a very large, a very wide promenade, sidewalk that goes all the way around. And so it is hoped that it would engender and stimulate development in the surrounding areas. In the 1980s, there seemed to have been an awareness by the government of the time that green space was a very important element within the city. And there was a drive at that time, a government agency was developed, and a number of green spaces were then built, constructed during that period. This is one of them, the Mandela Park, which is in one of our very busy urban centers, surrounded by transportation, surrounded by vendors. This is a public urban space, which is really more of a transition zone. It's really a square rather than a park. It serves its purpose in that because there is a lack of many public spaces, when there are events, this is one of the gathering spots where the locals, members of the community can congregate, and sometimes they watch games, they have public meetings, and those types of things happen in this space. Another one of the spaces that was developed during that period is what is termed Papine Park, which is really Papine Square. And this is a roundabout, really, surrounded by very busy traffic. One of the important things about this space is that it is diagonally across from the University of Technology. It is very close to the University of the West Indies and also the University Hospital. So it is one of the spaces where it is ripe. It is somewhere where it's another transition zone. Right behind it, we have the public market. And so it is one of those spaces where you have a lot of intermingling. Here you can see on the bottom left, the interior and the very busy traffic flows on the right. This is one of the areas that is in need of upgrading, in need of softening, and generally within the city, many of the parks, these older parks, are in need of maintenance and upgrading to better serve the community.
This is Trafalgar Park, which was also constructed during the same period. It's a small park and it's surrounded by 3 busy roads. And it lies in a predominantly commercial area, New Kingston. And it was originally in ruinate, but it was always well used and traversed by pedestrians. And they had clear diagonal desire lines for footpaths in it. So it was decided to be developed and a very simple type of park, but all the boundaries were to remain open. Unfortunately, with time, it attracted vagrants and undesirables and even ladies of the night. So the government decided to build a wall around it and to control the opening hours. Unfortunately, the entrance gates were built that did not correspond to the diagonal desire lines. And the result is that the park is mainly empty and rarely used. So it's really an example of that even with the best intentions to create a public green space without proper policing and education of the users, one's best efforts may not necessarily succeed.
Here we have an image of what became Emancipation Park. This plot of land was owned by a private club, the Ligonier Club, which is right behind. And they owned a total of 35 acres in this area of what is now New Kingston. The members of it's a wealthy social club, and they donated 7 acres of their space, of their land, to the government with the stipulation that it should become a public park. The government then launched a design competition, and the winning design was implemented. To the left, which is just off of the screen, would be the National Housing Trust, which is the agency which maintains this space. What was created is a very open space. At the time, it was done with guidelines or with the thought of what was done in Bogota, Colombia, where it was just a very open park. Sightlines were maintained for security reasons. It is fenced all around. It does have gates. It does have opening hours, but for the most part, it is accessible to many. There are many concerts, many events which are held during the year. It is a place for social integration. You can see to the top left, there's a jogging trail which goes around the entire park, and a huge event space. The difference between this park and many of the other parks that have been presented is that because the National Housing Trust has a designated budget to maintain this space, it is probably now the best maintained space in the city, and one of the most iconic parks. So if you were to Google parks in Jamaica, this is probably the one that would come up. However, we would need more parks. The intention at the time was that there was to be another or more parks developed in each parish, and that has never been done. And so we are in a position now where we have the few spaces that remain are now being threatened and to be taken over by development.
Unfortunately, the planning regulations in Jamaica often seem to ignore the needs of the pedestrian. And not only is there often no reservation to plant trees, so therefore it contributes to the heat island effect, but also it's very unsightly with utility poles, utility cabinets and overhead cables. And they seem to line every street in Jamaica. Also, another grave problem is that there are manholes that jut above the grade of the pavement and are very dangerous. And they are even sometimes left uncovered. And I cannot imagine what a nightmare this would be for anybody disabled who dares to try and navigate our streets. Next. Also, with regard to the building density, multi-story buildings are being allowed to be built on relatively small lots with very little setback from all the boundaries, including the road. And so, you know, the existing planning guidelines for pocket parks are really lacking. Next.
So with the new guidelines, we have more of developments such as what is being presented here. Multi-story residential complexes with amenity spaces on various levels. This one has a very extensive roof with a jogging trail and a pool and gazebo and entertainment spaces, and on various levels, different water features and gathering areas. But if you take a look at the plan, you will notice that right up to the boundary, it is hard, pretty much right up to the boundary, and there is actually very little green space. People, I think, even though the guidelines originally said that you would have a certain number of open space in a development, I think it has now been taken over by the term amenity space, which is not necessarily a green space. And so we have issues of increased stormwater. We have wind tunnels, which are a potential threat. We have the fact that many of these buildings are now going up in areas which were primarily low-scale residential areas. There doesn't seem to be a spatial plan which determines where these buildings will be located. And there are many other issues that are of concern to citizens. In the last 2 to 3 years, citizens have been raising their voice and have been writing into the papers. Here is one about Heroes Park. This was after the Parliament building design was announced. Another one about the reason why green spaces are beneficial to the public. Here's another one, appreciation of green spaces and parks, and this one came about after COVID came. Access to green spaces is a human right. Stifling in a concrete jungle, communities call for green, people-friendly urban planning in Kingston's Golden Triangle. Stop the developers, give us community and green space. And we could go on. This is just a sample of what the public has been saying. And so as landscape architects, we in Jamaica have come together and we would like to propose some solutions. put forward things that could probably help to increase our green space within a short period, something that is manageable. One way that we see is that at the moment, the government actually has a lot of buildings and official residences which are owned by the public, owned by the government, but at the moment inaccessible. One of them is the King's House, which is shown here, which is the home of the Governor General. This residence sits on hundreds of acres in the center of the city. And at one point, there was a thought to develop housing on a part of the land, but very easily, a part of the land could also be handed over or made available for public green space. One of the things about this is that it is already being maintained, and therefore to open it up or to open areas of it would not be adding a complete development onto the public purse. Another residence is Vale Royal, which is the official home of the Prime Minister. It is not used as a residence at the moment, and it is used for functions primarily. This space, as well as the one before, could be used in the same way that the White House in the United States is used. The White House is actually called the President's Park, and the grounds are actually maintained by the Park Service. The grounds are accessible to the public on occasion, many times of the year in a regulated way, but it is accessible at some point. We have other existing government-owned spaces, places like the railway system, which is no longer functioning, but the land is still there and the lines are still there. And if you think of, say, the High Line development, which was done in New York City, this could be a potential location of a similar type of park. We have the Kingston Waterfront. The waterfront is where we have a lot of our, there are multi-story buildings that currently line the shoreline. The government has tried to redevelop the waterfront and encourage investors to come back into the area to improve the economic activity. However, the waterfront still remains a lost opportunity. It is very popular. The green spaces which do exist are very popular with locals who do go on holidays or in the afternoon to relax, but it is not developed in many of the areas where they can take full advantage of a space like this. In the inner city, there are initiatives which are being spearheaded by local organizations. And in the heart of Kingston, a local NGO called Kingston Creative has tried to intervene by lifting the face of the city. And they have partnered with young artists and with paint companies to create a lane of murals. This was a very narrow street, and because the initiative started, the local Kingston and St. Andrew Municipal Council became involved by pedestrianizing the street, first of all, and then paving it to make it a nice pedestrian access through the area. It has become a tourist attraction. So for the time being, people are going, some of the murals are actually animated. There's an app that you can download on your phone, and when you point it at the images, they will come to life. They will dance, there is movement.
What
This
is-
is, go ahead, sorry, Pat.
What is wonderful about all of this activity from landscape architects and the city is that the Caribbean School of Architecture actually has a module on landscape architecture. And the Parliament building in downtown Kingston has this pocket area, a garden, and the Caribbean School of Architecture students actually did a whole proposal in 2019, Jenna, to showcase how this space could be done as a wonderful landscapes area for the students. And there were about at least 20 students who got together and they came up with this whole idea, and here's a model of how it could be used and how it could be integrated, not only for the members of parliament, but also for the public, because as we've been hearing, there is very little open space available in the downtown area. And there are still residents living down there, although after working hours, many of the spaces are empty. In this particular location, there are lots of children, and this was a wonderful unifying space for them. Thank you, Jenna.
Another area which potentially, sorry, go ahead, Marianne. Potential are gullies.
The city of Kingston is traversed by an extensive stormwater gully drainage system, and some of the gullies are still maintain a setback of open land along their banks, but some of these setbacks have been lost to informal settlements and squatters. They could, however, if suitably redeveloped, become green corridors serving as a pedestrian network linking the green spaces of the city. Unfortunately, though, the public perception of Kingston's gullies is that they are places to dump rubbish and where mosquitoes breed, and generally a crime-ridden, dangerous place. So in order to implement this would be a challenge and would require re-education, policing, and in some areas, resettlement programs. This plan outlines the idea we had of redeveloping or developing the urban green network in Kingston. And in it, we have looked at, firstly, the location of some of the larger public parks, which are in green on this slide. And they include things like Hope Gardens, the zoo, and the Botanic Gardens, and William Grant Park, and the other one which was mentioned earlier is Emancipation Park. And then in yellow, we have also outlined here some of the government-owned existing open land spaces, so you can begin to see what is kind of there. And there's, you know, things like King's House, but also the cemeteries, and it gives you slowly a network. Also, we have the waterfront, which is another larger area that is government owned, which obviously would be a great place to develop, as well as these small privately owned spaces like the pocket parks, which are purple here. We couldn't really outline the gully system and the railway system very easily. I mean, the railways we have shown on this slide in red, but the whole idea is that between the roads that are wide enough where pedestrians can actually walk and have some shade, and these various existing systems, that hopefully eventually we can link together all the existing green spaces in the city and create this network. And that's it.
Thank you. So we'll move on to showcase some of the one major public space in downtown Port of Spain. Pat? Well, this is the Lara Promenade, named after the famous cricketer. It is one of the transition zones as well in downtown Port of Spain, surrounded by shopping and heavy economic activity. It is a respite for residents and passers-by in this area. As you can see, they have benches and trees. You can see the shade. So it's a pretty pleasant space to traverse as you're going from one side of the city to the other. And here they have a statue of Brian Lara, who the park is named after. And I'll hand over to our landscape architecture colleagues from Barbados.
So I decided to present some of our professional practice projects in Bridgetown, the urban center of the island, and we're going to call it Regreening of Bridgetown. And these are a series of projects over a series of years that illustrate the activity that we've been involved in. So as I said earlier, it's a UNESCO site, and it is a home, the area is a home to a series of monuments, open spaces, historic buildings, and one of the key components of this designation is the serpentine layout of the street system, which is very different than a lot of the other islands and other cities in the world. The first project we're going to look at is somewhere we call Jubilee Gardens, which was formerly a bus terminal, an asphalt blacktop area in an important part of the city. And after a large kind of study that was called the redevelopment of Bridgetown, which was an urban design study, this space was identified and funding was found, and it was kind of made into this new urban space that turned out to be quite beautiful. The second one that came behind that was Independence Square, which is the home of the statue of Errol Barrow, who is the father of our independence. And this particular space improved on Jubilee Gardens in that it was a little more generous in shady areas, seating, less of a thoroughfare. So when people came through this design, they were more likely to hang around and recreate in the space. The space also benefited from the fact that it was on the careenage on the coastline. So that added a certain attraction that I think helped this space. And again, interesting to see how improvements were made over time. This is a photo of Kensington Oval. This site was redeveloped during Cricket World Cup. It's a historic venue, very important cultural and sporting site. The open green space, that's the field, is not open to the public, but Barbadians view it as a significant open space. What's interesting, if you look at the next slide, is there was a lot of effort on the outskirts of the site to create urban design details and integration to the streetscape of the city of that part of the streets of that part of the city. This photo focuses on a sculpture that was actually relocated from another site to this site of Sir Garfield Sobers, the last living national hero of Barbados and probably the greatest all-round cricketer in the world. Constitution River is a large drainage catchment that comes from inland Barbados and exits through Bridgetown, and it was redeveloped primarily as a drainage control project so that the areas adjacent to it were constantly flooded, and they opened the canal, they allowed the seawater to interact with the water coming out, but it did spin off a nice landscape architectural opportunity in creating walkways and spaces adjacent to it that the public could enjoy just for walking and relaxing or just viewing, driving down the street. And one interesting comment I can share on this one is we actually experimented with restoring mangroves, which the engineers were quite hesitant because they didn't want us to damage their riprap design work, but that component actually has been hugely successful. The mangroves have thrived. They took their time to grow, but they're literally, that's their home now, and the associated wildlife and activity that happens on it is thriving. We're currently bidding on phase 3, which takes this waterway further into the city, and there are other initiatives happening in the city like bike trails that want to connect to it, so we can start to see things coming together. Church Village Green. This is the front yard of the Central Bank of Barbados. So it's government owned, but it has a slightly different character, where this was a village, and the Central Bank of Barbados, when it was developed in 1985, took 25 years to relocate the residents. And they wanted to develop a public park that's still in their possession, but it's for the public, and they maintain it. So the maintenance is quite high relative to other spaces, and they program it probably not as nicely as the public would like, but they do take care of it. So the next slide will show the vision. So we went through the process of the vision in it, of the project. For me, again, the interest here was that the design detailing started to move away from Jubilee Gardens and Independence Square, where those had a lot of references to plantation houses and masonry work that you would find on high-end homes, and this got more contemporary. It had to relate to a historic Burley Marks landscape courtyard of the Central Bank, so it has a certain level of modern touches to it. It has elements of retaining the accesses of old streets in the village. We also introduced sculptures of traditional doors as seats, so that we paid homage to the village that was there before, but also repurposed it for very passive recreation and the potential for entertainment in a soft amphitheater. And the next slide will show you the finished project, where you can see the amphitheater. You can see down the center, there's that reference or suggestion of a roadway, which was an important roadway, and it terminates through drainage into what we call a natural pond, so less ornamental, kind of naturalized water system. And you can see the benches along the road with the doors to traditional houses. And then we move from that project over to Golden Square Freedom Park, which is a park that sits, there was 2 large buildings there that were knocked down, they were condemned, and the government of the day decided that Clement Payne, our national hero, who instigated the 1937 rebellion and probably is the father of our labor movement, the government of the day decided that it needed to be a public park. Now, my personal perception is there's a push in Bridgetown to redevelop. Revitalization is critical. The place is falling apart, and they are banking on high-end residential and mixed-use developments on the coastline in and around this area, which will back right up onto more low-income residential areas. And the government really wants to provide big open spaces that the public and visitors to the city could enjoy. So the next slide will show the vision, where you can see a certain level of independence of design, where we've left the traditional approach and detailing and got more geometric and functional with big shade canopies, traditional road tennis courts. We have elements of what we call ghosts of the village, where we design these structures that just look like old chattel houses. We have a memorial wall to memorialize those that died in the rebellion. We have a Builders of Barbados wall, where all the surnames of Barbadians are mounted on the wall, so you can find your name, you can visit and find your name. So, you know, we tried to, it's not, this park is not about a politician or a big person, it's about the people. And the last element that's significant here is, surprisingly enough, we were able to introduce the concept of significant Barbadian art being part of the project. So there's the Builders of Barbados wall, there's a community mural wall, there's the memorial wall, there's 4 sculptures to be commissioned, there's benches with local graphics on it. And I guess the last thing I would say on this particular project is we're currently in the birthing pains of realizing projects, because realizing projects are always difficult, and not as nice and neat as the visuals that we generate, but we're hopefully optimistic, because in this part you can see where we're at this moment, and we're supposed to finish in 4 weeks, or sorry, 2 weeks. So we'll see what happens. Another comment on this particular part, in addition to the independence of design, two comments. One was the last two projects, landscape architects were asked to submit proposals, which is much different than the first projects I showed, where we would have been invited by architects and teams, and larger teams, to get involved. In this case, the landscape architects were asked to present proposals. And this part probably gets a little farther ahead in terms of sustainability, where solar panels are planned for the roofs, and that's to power the park. There's under the road tennis court, there will be a large water tank for irrigation. There are some LED screens, which the advertising hopefully will help contribute to paying for the park. So hopefully we're moving ahead bit by bit in terms of resolving a lot of the issues of maintenance and programming, curation. I think there's small gains, but we're getting there. In addition to kind of the large monumental projects that are happening, we were lucky enough to be invited to on another initiative, which is to look at the invigoration and development of a cultural urban route, which could take many forms. You know, you could do a church visit where you hit all the big churches. You could deal with commerce. You could deal with the maritime environment. You could deal with open spaces. And there's a route that happens there. And it was a bit of a guerrilla warfare approach, where we tried to grab little streets, corners, alleys. And you can see in the next images, this project hasn't been realized, but you know, we would pick up, this particular photograph was a former taxi car park, and we had to negotiate with the taxi men to find them another location close to park, and then have a pickup spot at this location. But then we would add seating, concessions, landscape. This is right at the head of Broad Street, which is the main central street, which is, it's been debated for 40 years whether it should be pedestrianized completely. The next slide illustrates a small pocket park that was envisaged to be a vegetable production community park, featuring site art. And then this little piece of work was a suggestion of how we could take an oversized sidewalk, provide a small amenity. This site was actually next to a churchyard, which had a large wall. So a big element of the design work was, how do we, you know, break down the wall a bit and create these portals so that when you're on the sidewalk, you can appreciate the historic landscape of the church, and vice versa. If there's a funeral, a big gathering, they too can look out to the street. Rendering of a little vending corner and landscape development, because a big part of it was how would this urban route contribute to small business, and you know, how can landscape contribute to helping people get a better life in terms of business. And then finally, even wrestling with these small alleys that occur all over Bridgetown, which are, from a local point of view, are not of interest to locals, but I always find visitors getting lost in these alleys, and I'm like shocked, like, what are you doing walking down the alley? But they're cool. The buildings shade them. There's little wind tunnels coming through. So we looked at, you know, murals, little canopies, seating, landscape interventions to improve those and possibly use them as a big attraction to the city. And this graphic shows what we are describing, the emerging necklace of green spaces. And it starts in the top and winds through the city, and it extends along the coastline, because Bridgetown is blessed by having some beautiful recreational beaches literally 5 seconds out of town, both north and south. So I don't know if it's a necklace or if it's a pendant, but you can see by the image that it's starting to connect. And outside of the work that we would be doing, there are other landscape architects and designers with other initiatives that are happening, contiguously with what we're doing. So I expect that this green necklace could really improve. I'm a positive person, so I'm making it sound all great, but there are a lot of issues that, you know, we could discuss in terms of pitfalls, lessons learned, challenges, and I hope our discussion will continue that way. And one of the last pieces of this emerald necklace on the, I call it kind of the eastern side of the city as you're leaving the city. So it's bounded by very dense Barbadian urban populations, is an initiative, a passion project of the current Prime Minister, of the development of the National Botanical Gardens, which we don't have, as a lot of the other islands actually do have. And there was an assembly of mostly landscape architects in Barbados, and we were charged to work together, even though we're competitors, to come up with this master plan, which I can't even say birth in pains, because we're going through the process of design birthing, and we are now going through the politics and the pressure of trying to get to the next stage, which is construction drawings for work on site. But the nice side of the story of this particular project is it is already an open green space. So the government of this day and even previous governments have at least started to recognize that it needs to be clean, the trees need to be taken care of, and people can use it. It's already had calypso shows, people use it for jogging. So even though it's not a true botanical garden yet, it is a significant space and the plans are grand.
So thank you for listening. On behalf of all the Caribbean islands and our representatives here, we just hope that we've been able to share with you a little bit about our culture, our passions, our issues, and we look forward to participating in the future in any of the further initiatives that you might have. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.